Today's episode is an interview with Nancy Globus, a pharmacist who uses her voice to advocate for medication safety. I really enjoyed this interview because two of Nancy's passions overlap with mine: medication safety and poisoning prevention. You're listening to the Pharmacist Voice podcast, a journey-style podcast about my career change from pharmacist to voice actor. I'm your host, Kim Newlove. I alternate solo shows and interview shows. The solo shows are about my career change, and the interview shows feature a variety of people who use their voices to advocate, educate, or entertain. I specialize in medical narration and e-learning. If you have a project in mind, contact me through my website, thepharmacistvoice.com. Thank you for joining me for episode 62. Let me tell you a little more about my guest, Nancy Globus, then we'll dive right into our interview. Nancy Globus started in the pharmacy business at a young age. Her father opened his community pharmacy the year before she was born. Nancy began counting pills at her father's side and eventually earned a Bachelor of Science Degree in Pharmacy from Rutgers College of Pharmacy. Then she earned her PharmD from Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and Science and completed a one-year residency in a unique hospital where most of the drugs were ordered and monitored by clinical pharmacists. Nancy has worked in a number of practice settings. She honed her clinical skills in hospital practice, served roles in medical affairs, and eventually worked a number of years in the Med-ERRS subsidiary of ISMP, the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. There, she became proficient in all areas of medication safety, especially as error prevention applies to assisting the pharmaceutical and biotech industries in trademark safety testing, package label assessments, and other risk management and regulatory issues. When she's not saving humanity from confusing drug names and hard-to-read product labels, Nancy can be found translating medicalese for family members and friends and obsessing over her nail polish and cosmetics collection. She remains passionate about community pharmacy and has a strong interest in patient advocacy. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Nancy Globus. Nancy, welcome to the Pharmacist Voice podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
My pleasure. I'm excited to talk about one of my favorite topics. How do you use your voice as a pharmacist to advocate for medication safety?
I think a pharmacist's role in preventing medication errors is so important. And how I use my voice is I work directly with the industry evaluating drug names, drug labels, and drug labeling and product design. So that safety can be built into the product and errors can be prevented.
Awesome. I really respect what you do. The world needs medication safety experts, for sure.
Yes, and one of the most important things that pharmacists out in the field can do is report medication errors and hazardous situations that are seen, because that's how we learn. Just like we learn about adverse events because of reporting and pharmacovigilance, we also learn about medication errors and potential hazardous situations by reports. And every healthcare practitioner, actually everyone who's involved in the medication use process, has a responsibility for medication error prevention. And the industry has responsibility, practitioners have responsibility, patients have responsibility, and everybody has to work together to recognize these situations and make sure that once a situation is recognized, that it doesn't happen again. Everyone thinks that, oh, that error could never happen here. And the sad truth is, yes, it can.
Yes, a lot of people think this won't happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a safe thought, is it?
No, not at all. Not at all.
What are a couple of ways people can report safety issues?
One way is to the FDA through the MedWatch program. Another is to the manufacturer directly. If if a patient knows what product is used, and also to the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. They have a reciprocal agreement with FDA, where through the Freedom of Information Act, where the error reports are analyzed and shared.
Would you say that calling a poison control center could also be another way?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's funny that you bring up poison control. That was an early love of mine. I did a couple of rotations uh, when I was in PharmD school, and I worked part time at the Poison Control Center in Philadelphia. Um, and it, it, it's one of those areas where I could have gone off on that tangent and my career would have been completely different. But I think pharmacists are just instrumental, no matter what role you're playing in providing information. So whether it's in that acute situation where you have a panicked parent on the phone, my kid just I found him, with the bottle of shampoo in his hand, or if you have a patient at your counter, with cold and flu symptoms. It's all about that communication of information and tailoring that information to the audience that you're presented with. So, like when I interact with people in the industry, it's obviously a different message than back when I was working in a pharmacy or working in a hospital. And the same goes for interactions with the regulatory bodies like FDA and EMA. Those are very formal communications, and I think a pharmacist, just by our training, they're just so well suited to be those communicators.
Well, that's wonderful. I really sense this passion for medication safety and even a little bit for poisoning prevention, too, of course.
Absolutely.
I've got to ask you, how did you get started in pharmacy? And then how did you develop this love of medication safety, poisoning prevention, and what you're doing now?
Well, I grew up in a community pharmacy. My parents opened a family pharmacy the year before I was born, in fact. And so I grew up, started out fixing the cards and the greeting cards and dusting the shelves, and really took an interest in it and worked with my dad, went to pharmacy school. And I guess because I had already kind of grown up there, I wanted to see what else was out there. So went further. It was back when the curriculum was a PharmD was a post baccalaureate degree, and did a residency, and really fell in love uh, with providing clinical services, which grew out of people coming into the store and showing my dad, Al, look at my rash. And,
People really do it. Yep.
they really do. Um, and um, eh, so so I really, just had this love of, just seeing what else was next in the pharmacy world, and worked in the industry for a few years. And when I landed at a subsidiary of the Institute for Safe Medication Practices in 2001, like once I learned that the whole all of the multifactorial um, causes that go into a medication error happening, and looking at those root causes, like I was just hooked on on the the risk management and risk assessment sort of, looking at a situation and what went wrong here. That's the thinking is, what went wrong in this particular situation that may have led to this, that may have led to that. It's, just like a cascade sometimes that happens. And, once I learned about that background of, doing a root cause analysis or being proactive about it and learning from those mistakes, I was totally hooked. And then being able to apply that to the drug development process and the commercialization and approval process, that was just it for me. Like I found my love.
You're a problem solver, I can tell.
Kind of, yeah, yeah. It's, picking apart a situation, and, it's like this risk assessment kind of brain goes on everywhere. Like, even it was kind of funny when, just something silly like, like the act of picking, when you're shopping online, picking a product off of, everybody's buying groceries online these days because of the
Yep.
pandemic. And for my son's 14th birthday, I almost made him 74 because the one candle looked like a seven. And it's the same thing. That's how errors happen in picking a drug off of a pick list, either on an automated dispensing cabinet um, or on a order entry screen. And that's where that evaluation of drug names comes into play, and looking at how that's going to be used, how that name or that label is going to be thrown into the vortex that is our healthcare system, and just really playing out what could happen. That's the risk assessment brain working overtime.
Well, you bring up a good point. Let's talk about that. Fonts is really what you're talking about. The candle is in one font, and if when you write it in handwriting, it's a different font. If you type it, it's another font. And when you get a label that prints out of a computer, it's yet another font.
Right.
Yeah, and in my course, Pronounce Drug Names Like a Pro, I actually talk about this, how you need to know the shape of the drug name because you're going to see it in print, you're going to see it on a printed drug label, you're going to see it on a computer screen, and you need to understand what it looks like.
Exactly. And I know that electronic prescribing is on the increase, um, but you're also going to see it in handwriting. So all of those things, and sometimes on labels that print out for a pharmacy label or on those screens, it's all caps, and you don't have that variation in with the upstrokes and downstrokes
Mhm.
in the letters that can help you identify a word shape. Um, so yeah, it's very important, and that goes into the creation and the evaluation of names.
Well, let's talk about drug names. How can medication safety professionals like you affect drug names and labeling?
Well, I think, one thing is the first and foremost is just awareness, and awareness of how errors happen, and two things sitting on a shelf next to each other, things like that. I mean, what I do is a little bit niche, but there certainly are opportunities in the industry for pharmacists to be involved in commercialization and marketing teams to 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 really be aware of the types of errors that can happen and try to build that into the the product development process. In fact, if you asked me, really my dream for the pharmaceutical industry, um, is to have a medication safety officer, if you will, in every company. We have them in hospitals. It's a growing trend, and I would love to see them in the industry to work cross functionally. Again, there's that communication piece, for a pharmacist to work cross functionally with the development teams, with the commercialization teams, with the marketing teams, and the design teams. And don't wait for the product to get out on the market and an error to happen and get reported and have to be reactive to it. Let's be proactive and at least have an awareness. I'm not saying that the industry doesn't. They do, but in a, in a coordinated fashion, to have somebody who, that's their responsibility to work with the design teams. It's a little bit more prevalent, maybe not a pharmacist in the device industry, and but because design and user testing is part and parcel of that. um, but to have a cross-functional team that has the final use and error prevention in mind, that's really my dream.
When I'm gonna take this conversation on a little bit of a side trip because there have
Sure.
there have been some drug name changes because unfortunately it didn't get done right the first time, and it's hard to tell what's going to happen. I am not pointing my finger at any company and saying they did wrong,
Of
but
course,
there are
of
some
course.
things that you just cannot predict until a drug comes to market, and I just wanted to bring up the topic of Losec being changed to Prilosec and get your thoughts on that. What happened there?
Sure. It was actually, before I got started in this industry of naming and safety testing and drug name evaluation. But that was really the catalyst that that put the finger on why evaluation is so important, and pre-market. And the regulations have grown up through the years and have morphed, and it has grown into a big issue because let's face it, from an industry standpoint, um, a post-marketing name change is, that's a nightmare for a drug company. I mean, just the costs that go into that, and even, eh, all of the energy that goes into the creation and naming of a product and all of the assets that go with it, all of the packaging.
Applications.
Yeah, and the packaging and the printing and the advertising. It just, the name is just everywhere. And yeah, so that post-marketing name change, the Prilosec, Losec issue,
Now, what 2
was
drugs were confused? I'm sorry, I just
uh,
want for anybody listening that doesn't know about this, which 2 drugs got confused?
I was just gonna get into that,
Okay,
Losec and Lasix. And if you think about the how that error happened, both come in the same strengths, 20 milligram, 40 milligram, PO orally, once a day. So there's no, it's what we call confirmation bias on an order. If somebody looked at a prescription for Losec and thought they saw Lasix, there's no disconfirming evidence to say, oh, hey, oh, it says 15 milligrams. Oh, it can't be Lasix. No, it's 20 milligrams once a day, 40 milligrams once a day. There's so uh, that's the other thing that we look at when we look at the risk of confusion is what else besides just the name can be confused? Are they both given by the same route of administration, the same administration schedule, the same strength? If all of those things overlap, then it's going to bump your risk of confusion way up. If those things don't overlap, things, these what we call non-name attributes. So the confusion between two names is one thing, but then the non-name attributes like the strength, the dosage form, the dosage schedule is another. And that's where the prediction of how likely is this to be going to be involved in an error comes in. And like you said, it's not like anybody did anything right or wrong. And there have been other post-marketing name changes due to confusion. And, hopefully, there have only been a handful over the years. And I was involved in many of them. Um, but hopefully the processes that companies are putting into place and that name creators and branding companies are putting into place and working together with the industry and the regulators will result in a solution that is a name that's not confused, but it's also why drug names are so weird. Everybody complain, which, the weirder a name is, the harder it is to pronounce, right?
Yes, it can be difficult. Can you talk a little bit about all that? You've been involved in the naming of some drugs, right? Can you explain what your role is and maybe how anybody among us, pharmacists or patients, would know how to pronounce it?
Well, sometimes when we do evaluations, we do look at, what the pronunciation guidelines are. And that typically comes from the pharma company. But there are always going to be regional differences and just speech differences that, may influence how a drug name is pronounced.
I totally get you on that. I think more about getting it right instead of trying to be right because like you said,
Mhm.
there's going to be people from different parts of the world pronouncing these
Yes.
drug names, different parts of the US. People are going to have different regional accents like you said. Somebody
Mhm.
from the south is not going to sound like me. I live so close to Canada, I almost sound Canadian? One of the things that I appreciate is medication guides or package inserts because when the pronunciation is broken down on that information that's available to anybody,
Mhm.
that is incredibly helpful. And I was
Yes.
wondering, is that something that's required? Because I noticed some drugs do it and some don't. And it would just be so helpful if everybody did it.
Right, right, and if it was broken down in a way that anybody could understand. Not everybody has, pronunciation marks drilled into them in elementary school. Like, not everybody can look at a schwa and know what that means.
Right.
So if I mean, it's much more common in consumer products than prescription products. But, with all of the direct to consumer advertising that is out there now in this country, um, that also, if you can get past all the music in the background on the commercials and the voiceover talking about the potential adverse events, that gives a good clue to patients who are much more involved in their journey through an illness these days. That can give them a clue of how a product name is to be pronounced. But yes, it would be so helpful, and also not only for patients but for healthcare practitioners as well. Because I mean, I know, if I go into a pharmacy or if I'm at a doctor's office or in a hospital, um, the people that I'm speaking with, I don't want them, stumbling over names of a product because that just tells me, like, do these people really know what they're talking about? Like, it's a trust thing, like if I hear a pharmacist say hyoscamine instead of hyoscyamine, or somebody taking a medication history saying warfarin instead of warfarin, it's like it makes me kind of question, like, how well do they really know these products?
You hit on some really good topics. I That's one of the reasons I made my pronunciation course. There are some people, even healthcare professionals, that
Of
do not
course.
know how to pronounce these things. And what I was alluding to was the fact that on these medication guides these days, sometimes the pronunciation is on there, meaning the written words, the
Mhm.
phonetic spelling. I
Yes.
I want you to know I appreciate that so much, and I know that you're in the industry, so I just wanted to say, keep doing it. It's good. It's good for all of us.
Right, right,
And a lot of
and
people don't know it's there, so this is our public service announcement, Nancy.
exactly,
Look at the
exactly.
medication guides, people. It's there.
Right. Don't throw it directly in the trash. It's there.
Nancy, do you wanna talk about some of the creativity and the different safety considerations, the trademarks and legal aspects, and maybe even some of the regulatory aspects that go into naming a medication, a brand name medication?
Sure, and it's really much more complex than people realize. So, yes, there's the creative aspect that goes into creating a name that is going to fit with the product and the fit to concept and the voice that the company wants to get across with the product, but also it, you have to make sure that the name isn't confusing, not only from a medication safety standpoint, but also from a legal standpoint. So in the US, for instance, you have two different bodies that are approving a name. You have the FDA that has to approve the name as part of a new drug application, and you also have the US Patent and Trademark Office that has to approve a name. So, like I said, it has to be not confusing or not confusingly similar is uh, how it's referred to legally, so that it's not confused and results in a medication error, but also so it's not confused and causes confusion in the marketplace and infringement on someone else's name and could cause confusion that way as well. So they look at the similarity of the name and the similarity of goods. So that's why Sonata, for instance, is a Hyundai Sonata is a car and Sonata is a sleeping medication. Those two things are never going to be confused. Um,
Hmm.
that's just one example, but those are the things that the Patent and Trademark Office looks at. And then it gets even more complex when a company is looking for a global name, because the that that name, a global name for a drug product, because that name has to be approved not only by the US FDA, but the drug regulators in whatever other jurisdictions the product is going to be approved in, and also has to be trademarked in each of those countries. So that's like a little bit of a look behind the curtain as to why drug naming is so complex. And pharmaceuticals are also held to a little bit of a higher standard than other products. Like, you know, who cares if, two lipsticks get mixed up? Not really anybody. But if two drug products get mixed up, that could result in patient harm. I shouldn't say nobody cares about two lipsticks getting mixed up. The manufacturers of those products, not nobody cares, but you
From a
know what I mean.
safety aspect, I
Yeah,
totally get you. We're
exactly,
talking about
exactly.
safety today.
Right.
Lipsticks are probably gonna be safe if the names are are a little similar. Yes, I got
Right.
you on that one. Yep.
Yeah.
Nancy, I'm going to put you on the spot. There's a lot of pharmacists out there that are looking to do something else.
Mhm.
If someone wanted to do what you do, how would they do it? And are there a lot of opportunities for this right now?
I think there are opportunities in the industry. I'm not going to lie. What I do is pretty niche, but there are definitely, well, certainly there are tons of opportunities for pharmacists to be involved in medication error prevention and medication safety. So that's just the baseline. So awareness, communication, reporting, all of those, no matter what role you're in, you can do that. And there are definitely opportunities in the industry in medical information, again, designing and communicating that information that might be in product labeling. That's a way. There are opportunities on marketing and commercialization teams for pharmacists. I think I would encourage pharmacists who, student pharmacists or people who might be starting out in their career is just not to pigeonhole yourself and look at some of the broader business type opportunities that may be out there where you can use your pharmacy knowledge and your scientific knowledge, but it may not be a pharmacy job per se, if that makes sense.
No, it's revealing. I didn't know if there was a certain thing. You know how we pharmacists like a clear plan. If you go
Yes.
to pharmacy school and then you graduate and then you do this residency, then you will be qualified for this. And if you do this, then it leads to that. And I was just wondering if there's a clear path or if really you end up stumbling into it because the collection of all your different skills makes you qualified for this unique work. What would you say?
Y you hit the nail on the head, honestly, Kim, and, part of it was a stumble into it for me, but part of it also was, my zigzagged path prepared me. So, I had one job for a couple of years in medical communications that I thought was going to be, in a stepwise fashion, and it didn't work out, and I ended up going back to hospital practice for a couple years after that, and I got some of my best hands-on clinical experience during those years, and all of those experiences have served me well. And I saw a quote recently. It was like, you know we don't lose, we either win or we learn. And I think that's good career advice for pharmacists who, like you said, really expect this clear path, and it may or may not be there.
That is a fair statement. But thank you for sharing your path. And I've got to ask you a kind of off the wall question to wrap this
Sure.
up. If you could say what your dream job is, what would your dream job be?
It's going to be one of two. I'm going to combine my love of naming and my love of cosmetics. And my first dream job would be working for OPI nail polish, naming nail polish colors. And my second dream job kind of plays off of that whole communicator role of the pharmacist. And I said this all through pharmacy school that I always wanted to be the medical reporter on the TV news. And that would be my other dream job.
I love it. I never would have guessed this answer would have come from a pharmacist, but that's so cool.
Yeah.
Don't stop dreaming. It could happen someday. You never know.
Yeah. I'm I, I'm a little old to be, like a TV face, but
I think no matter your age, no matter your background, always keep dreaming. You never know who's going to hear something like this. The people at OPI might be listening and they're thinking, hey, we need somebody to name these nail polish colors. We need Nancy.
I've been actively collecting nail polish since 2009. So, um, little known fact, I have over 500 bottles of nail polish.
Wow. So when you go to get a manicure or a pedicure, do you bring your own or do you choose from off the wall?
Neither. I do it myself.
Well, I bet you've got some skills.
Little known skills, little known skills.
That's fun. That's fun. I love it when I talk to people that have a great personality. You've got to have your own interests and things that you love. It keeps you going, don't you
Yeah,
think?
yeah. I agree. I agree. I agree.
Well, Nancy, let's wrap this up. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we end our interview?
Nothing other than from the keep on dreaming standpoint. I really admire what you do and how you've taken your pharmacy career in a really unique direction, and just providing a platform for other pharmacists to speak. I think it's a really valuable thing. So I appreciate your time so much. And thanks so much for having me on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for being on the Pharmacist Voice podcast, Nancy. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Kim. You too.
Thank you for joining me for episode 62 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Visit thepharmacistvoice.com to subscribe and read the show notes.